I am Nia, 32 years old, and right now I am staring at 20 million reasons why my husband belongs in a federal penitentiary. For 5 years, I carried the weight of our marriage defending the man I loved against a family who called him a gold digger. I sacrificed my relationship with my billionaire father to build a life with Marcus. So when Marcus told me we were bankrupt and federal agents were coming for us, I did exactly what he told me to do. I hid. But the person who found me freezing in a gutter was not the FBI. It was my father, and the secret he brought with him shattered my entire reality. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to rebuild your life after someone you loved burned it to the ground. The rain was coming down in sheets that night, turning the dirt under the Interstate 85 overpass into a thick and freezing sludge. The deafening sound of 18-wheelers rushing above me was the only thing drowning out the chattering of my own teeth. I was huddled inside a cheap nylon tent, wearing a damp sweatshirt clutching my knees to my chest. I had been living in this concrete wasteland for 3 agonizing days. My husband Marcus had driven me here in the dead of night, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. He had looked at me with tears in his eyes, telling me a story that made my blood run cold. He claimed his logistics company had been targeted by federal investigators due to a catastrophic accounting error. He swore we were millions of dollars in debt, that all our accounts were frozen, and that the authorities were issuing warrants for our arrest. He told me to leave my phone, my identification, and my credit cards in the car so we could not be tracked. He promised he just needed 72 hours to meet with a fixer, file emergency bankruptcy papers, and clear my name. I was his wife. I loved him. I stepped out of the car into the dark, trusting the man I had sacrificed everything for, believing he was protecting me from federal prison. I sat in the mud for 3 days, jumping at every shadow, surviving on 2 bottles of water and a pack of stale crackers. I waited for my husband to come back and save me. But Marcus did not come. Instead, the blinding headlights of 3 massive black SUVs cut through the darkness of the underpass. The vehicles swerved off the pavement, their tires tearing through the mud, and formed a barricade right in front of my tent. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. Panic seized my throat. I thought the federal agents had finally found me. I backed away, bracing myself to be handcuffed and dragged away. The heavy door of the lead vehicle swung open. A man stepped out into the freezing rain, his polished leather shoes sinking into the mud. He was not a federal agent. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit, his posture rigid and commanding. It was Winston Davenport, my father. I had not spoken to my father in 5 long years. Our relationship ended the day I chose Marcus. My father, a self-made millionaire who built a shipping empire from the ground up, had taken one look at Marcus and declared him a manipulative gold digger. My father told me Marcus only saw my earning potential as a financial risk consultant and my proximity to the Davenport wealth. I had called my father a controlling elitist who could not stand to see me with a hard-working black man who was trying to build his own business. My father issued an ultimatum. If I walked out the door to marry Marcus, I would be stripped of my inheritance and cut off forever. I walked out anyway. For 5 years, I carried the financial weight of my marriage. I worked 80-hour weeks analyzing corporate risk, paying our mortgage, and pouring my salary into Marcus and his endless stream of failed startups. I endured the constant emotional manipulation from his mother, Vonda, who lived in a house I paid for, yet constantly reminded me I was too career-obsessed to be a proper wife to her son. I took it all, desperate to prove to my father that my marriage was a success. Now, looking at my father standing in the rain, I felt a wave of profound shame. I expected him to sneer. I expected him to deliver the ultimate judgment. I slowly stood up, wrapping my arms around my freezing body, ready to defend Marcus one last time. "Dad," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the rain. "You need to leave. Marcus is in terrible trouble. The company went under. The feds are looking for us. We have absolutely nothing left." My father did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with a rage that seemed to stop the rain itself. He marched forward, ignoring the mud ruining his suit. He did not reach out to hug his missing daughter. He pointed a rigid finger directly at my face. "What in the name of God are you doing in this slum, Nia?" he roared, his deep voice vibrating off the concrete pillars. "Where is the $20 million trust fund I transferred to you last month?" I froze. The cold wind bit through my wet clothes, but I could not feel it anymore. The words simply did not process in my brain. I shook my head slowly, taking a step back. $20 million? What are you talking about? I have not taken a single dime from you in 5 years. We are completely broke, Dad. Marcus lost everything. He told me to hide here so I would not get arrested. My father let out a harsh, booming laugh that lacked any trace of humor. Broke. Lost everything. He reached inside his coat pocket, pulled out a thick manila envelope and slammed it directly against my chest. The flap burst open, and several heavy watermarked documents spilled out, landing in the muddy puddles at my feet. "Pick them up," he demanded, his voice cracking like a whip. "Read them. Read what your precious, hard-working husband has been doing while you freeze to death in a gutter." My hands were numb and shaking, but the sheer force of my father's anger compelled me to crouch down. I grabbed one of the soaked papers. It was a certified bank statement from a premier private wealth institution. The account header bore two names, Nia Davenport and Marcus Cole. I did not even know this account existed. I squinted at the numbers through the pouring rain, my professional training as a financial auditor kicking in automatically. The transaction history told a story of absolute devastation. 4 weeks ago, there was a wire deposit of $20 million from the Davenport Family Trust, and then an immediate systematic dismantling of those funds. $3 million wired to an offshore holding company in the Caymans. $5 million transferred to a luxury real estate brokerage in Buckhead. $2 million routed directly into a private checking account, owned solely by Vonda Cole, my mother-in-law. There were purchases for high-end luxury vehicles, designer jewelry, and exclusive country club memberships. The available balance at the bottom of the page was 0.00. My breath hitched in my throat. The numbers blurred as rain dripped onto the paper. I looked up at my father, the wet document trembling in my hand. "You sent me money?" I asked, my voice cracking under the weight of the realization. "After 5 years of silence, you sent me $20 million. My father's expression finally softened just a fraction, revealing the deep pain hiding beneath his fury. "I heard your consulting firm downsized your division," he said quietly. "I knew you were carrying the entire financial burden for that parasite." A father never stops worrying about his daughter Nia. "I established a secure trust and released the funds directly to a private account verified under your social security number. I waited for you to call. I waited for you to tell me you were safe, but you never called, so I had my security team track the money. They found the transactions, and then they found you living under a bridge." I stared down at the zero balance again. The truth hit me with the force of a freight train. Marcus had not lost everything. He had intercepted the money. He and his mother had somehow bypassed the security protocols, forged my authorization, and drained $20 million of my father's money. There were no federal investigators. There was no bankruptcy. Marcus had intentionally driven me out to the worst part of Atlanta, stripped me of my identification and phone, and dumped me under a bridge with a lie. He left me here to starve and hide from imaginary police simply to get me out of the way so he could run off with my family's fortune. The man I had defended, the man I had sacrificed my relationship with my father for, had thrown me away the second he got his hands on the cash. The drive from the highway overpass to the Buckhead neighborhood took 20 minutes, but sitting in the passenger seat of my father's vehicle, it felt like an eternity. The silence between us was heavy, thick with the unsaid apologies and 5 years of wasted time. I stared out the window as the rain battered the glass, watching the rundown buildings fade into sprawling, manicured estates. We pulled up to a massive wrought iron gate. It swung open instantly, granting us access to a long, winding driveway lined with imported palm trees and expensive lighting. This was the exact address Marcus had given me a month ago when he claimed he was meeting with a bankruptcy lawyer to save our house. Now I knew the truth. He was not meeting a lawyer. He was closing escrow. My father threw the vehicle into park right in front of the grand entrance. He kept his hands on the steering wheel and looked straight ahead. I will wait here, he said quietly. This is your house to clean. I stepped out of the vehicle and into the freezing rain. My wet sweatshirt clung to my shivering body, and my sneakers were caked in thick, foul-smelling mud. I walked up the marble steps of the estate. The massive double doors made of solid oak were firmly shut, but I could hear the muffled thumping of heavy bass music from inside. I did not search for a doorbell. I did not care who was watching. I lifted my mud-covered shoe and kicked the center of the doors with every ounce of rage that had been building inside me for 3 days. The heavy wood crashed open the doors, rebounding violently against the entryway walls. The sudden noise silenced the music immediately. The blast of warm, climate-controlled air washed over my freezing skin. I stepped into a foyer dripping in absolute wealth. A massive crystal chandelier hung from a 30-foot ceiling. Waitstaff in crisp white uniforms froze in their tracks, holding silver trays loaded with champagne flutes and expensive appetizers. The living room was packed with people dressed in designer evening wear, laughing and drinking. And right in the center of it all, lounging on a custom white Italian leather sectional, was the man who promised to love and protect me. Marcus was wearing a tailored silk shirt, a diamond-encrusted watch gleaming on his wrist, and he had his arm draped casually around the waist of a stunning woman in a tight red dress. He was laughing completely carefree, while I was supposed to be hiding in a ditch from federal agents. Before Marcus even noticed me standing in the doorway, the crowd parted. Vonda, my monster of a mother-in-law, marched toward me. She was wearing an emerald green gown, her hair perfectly styled, and a diamond necklace resting on her chest that caught the light so aggressively it made me sick. The same woman who had cried in my kitchen 2 months ago begging me to pay her utility bills was now playing the role of a wealthy socialite. Vonda stopped a few feet away. Her eyes dragged up and down my soaked, filthy body. She did not look surprised to see me. She looked absolutely disgusted. She raised her crystal glass and casually tipped it forward, letting the expensive champagne pour directly onto my muddy shoes. You actually have the nerve to bring your filthy delusions into my new home. Vonda sneered, her voice intentionally loud enough for every guest to hear. I told Marcus you were losing your mind, but tracking us down here looking like a stray dog just proves it to everyone. You are completely unhinged. Look at yourself, Nia. You are a public embarrassment. Marcus finally stood up. He patted the woman in the red dress on the shoulder and walked slowly toward me. He did not look guilty. He did not look shocked. He looked profoundly bored, like a man dealing with a nuisance he had outgrown. Nia, you need to leave immediately, he said smoothly, playing the part of the exhausted, long-suffering husband flawlessly. I told you it was over. My lawyer sent the divorce papers to your sister's house yesterday morning. I cannot keep dealing with your mental breakdowns. It is draining me. Vonda stepped closer, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy as she addressed the silent room. My son deserves peace, she announced loudly. He deserves a woman who can actually give him a family, not a barren, unstable liability who ruins every business venture he attempts with her paranoid accusations. You dragged my son down for 5 long years, Nia. You forced him to put up with your crazy episodes. We are done playing caretaker to a woman who refuses to get psychiatric help. 3 days ago, those words would have shattered me into a million pieces. The insult about my infertility, the gaslighting about my mental health, the absolute betrayal from the man I loved. But standing there in the mud, I felt nothing but a cold, calculated clarity. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I ignored Vonda completely and locked eyes with my husband. I do not care about your divorce papers, Marcus. I said, my voice dangerously steady, cutting through the silence of the room like a blade. I care about the $20 million you stole from my family trust. I want to know exactly how you bypassed the dual authentication to drain that account into your mother's name. The guests gasped, murmuring among themselves. Marcus did not panic. He simply chuckled, a low, arrogant sound that made my blood run cold. He walked over to a marble console table, picked up a sleek leather folder, and pulled out a single sheet of thick legal paper. He walked back and held it up, stopping just out of my reach. What money, Nia? He asked, a cruel smile stretching across his face. You mean the generous charitable donation you authorized? I stared at the paper, my mind racing back to 4 weeks ago. I had suffered a severe panic attack after Marcus told me we were being audited by the IRS. My chest had tightened, my vision had blurred, and he had rushed me to the emergency room. They had pumped me full of sedatives to lower my heart rate. I remembered waking up groggy, barely able to keep my eyes open, while Marcus held my hand and told me he needed my signature on some hospital release forms so he could handle the billing. I had signed where he pointed, trusting him implicitly. I had signed my entire life away in a drug-induced haze. At the bottom, clear as day, was my signature. Marcus tapped the black ink. Do you not remember signing this general power of attorney when you were hospitalized for that massive panic attack last month? The doctors gave you a lot of heavy sedatives to calm you down, babe. But the notary was right there in the room with us. Everything in your accounts was legally and willingly transferred to the Cole Family Investment Fund. You gave it to us, Nia, legally, and you do not have a single penny left to your name to fight it. The heavy mahogany doors of the Buckhead mansion slammed shut in my face, the sound echoing through the freezing rain. I stood on the porch, the forged power of attorney document still burned into my memory. Marcus and Vonda had legally stripped me of $20 million, and they had done it while holding my hand in a hospital room. I turned away from the house, the cold finally biting through my wet clothes, but the fire in my chest burned hotter than ever. I did not go back to my father waiting in the SUV. I needed to see the one person who was supposed to have my back no matter what. My older sister, Chloe. Chloe lived 15 minutes away in a gated, ultra-exclusive neighborhood in Alpharetta. Her world was one of manicured lawns, country club memberships, and absolute perfection. I paid an exorbitant fee for a ride share, my clothes soaking the leather seats as we drove through the storm. I walked up the pristine brick pathway to her massive front door. I pressed the doorbell, shivering, desperate for my own blood to let me in, to help me tear apart Marcus's forged documents. I expected my sister to open the door with open arms. Instead, the door swung open to reveal Trent, my white brother-in-law. Trent was the director of a prestigious private wealth management firm. He stood 6'2", dressed in a pressed cashmere sweater and designer slacks, holding a crystal glass of bourbon. He did not step aside to let me out of the storm. He stood dead center in the doorway, blocking the warmth of the foyer. His eyes slowly raked over my muddy sneakers, my soaked sweatshirt, and my shivering frame. The look of absolute disgust on his face was not hidden. He did not see a family member in trouble. He saw a nuisance trespassing on his property. Before I could even speak, Trent took a slow sip of his bourbon. "I told you, Chloe," he called out over his shoulder, his voice dripping with condescension. "I told you this would happen. Uneducated black women like her cannot hold on to money. Go back under the bridge. This white upscale neighborhood is not meant for people who drag their street drama onto my front porch. You are violating the neighborhood association rules just by standing here looking like a vagrant." I balled my hands into fists, my fingernails digging into my palms. "Get out of my way, Trent. I am not leaving until I see my sister. Marcus stole $20 million from the family trust. He forged my signature on a power of attorney." Trent let out a sharp, mocking laugh. He leaned against the doorframe, clearly enjoying my desperation. "Marcus did not steal anything you did not willingly hand over, Nia. You were foolish enough to give a desperate man the keys to the castle. Do not come crying to us because you lack basic financial literacy." Footsteps clicked against the hardwood floor inside. Chloe appeared behind Trent, wearing a silk robe, holding a glass of white wine. My older sister, the woman I had shared secrets and dreams with since childhood, looked at me with the exact same expression of revulsion as her husband. There was no pity in her eyes, there was no sisterly concern, there was only pure, unadulterated annoyance. "Chloe," I pleaded, taking a half step forward. "Marcus forged my signature while I was sedated in the hospital. He and Vonda drained $20 million from Dad's trust. I need to use your computer. I need to log into the federal database and freeze the secondary accounts before they move the money offshore. Please just let me inside." Chloe did not move to open the screen door. She took a slow sip of her wine and shook her head. "You always ruin everything, Nia," she said, her voice cold and flat. "You ruined your relationship with Dad to marry that loser. You ruined your career trying to support him. and now you are trying to ruin my Tuesday night with your chaotic broke energy. I am not letting you bring that mess into my home. My family is peaceful. We are respected in this community. I will not let your poor choices infect my life. I stared at my own sister, completely blindsided. She was choosing her pristine suburban facade over my life. She was standing next to a man who just hurled racist insults at me, nodding in agreement. "You are turning me away," I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Your own sister is standing in the freezing rain telling you she was just robbed of millions of dollars, and you are worried about your neighborhood association." "You did this to yourself," Chloe replied sharply. "Trent warned you years ago that Marcus was a financial liability. But you always had to be the smart one, did you not? You always had to prove you could fix him. Well, look at you now. You are pathetic. Go back to Dad and beg for forgiveness. We are done here." Trent smirked, raising his glass in a mock toast. "You heard her, Nia. Run along. Leave the wealth management to the professionals." He began to push the heavy oak door shut. But in that final agonizing second, my eyes darted past Trent's shoulder. The camera perspective shifts over Trent's shoulder, focusing sharply on the entryway console table, bathed in the warm light of a designer lamp. There, resting casually on the marble surface, was a thick leather folio bearing the gold-embossed logo of Trent's private wealth management firm. The folio was open. My eyes are trained to catch anomalies. I am a risk auditor. I process financial discrepancies faster than most people read a book. In the fraction of a second before the door clicked shut, my eyes locked onto the top document inside that folio. It was a wire transfer confirmation slip. I saw the routing number. I saw the exact amount, $5 million. But it was the sender's account name that made the blood freeze in my veins. The transfer was not from a corporate client. It was from Cole Logistics, Marcus's shell company. The heavy door slammed shut, the lock clicking into place with a definitive thud. I stood alone on the porch, the rain washing over me, but I could not feel the cold anymore. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with terrifying violence. Marcus was a smooth talker, but he was not a financial genius. He did not have the offshore connections or the banking knowledge to bypass the federal security triggers on a $20 million wire transfer. He could not have moved that money so fast without triggering an immediate fraud alert. He needed an inside man. He needed a director of private wealth management who knew exactly how to structure the transfers, hide the assets in shell companies, and wash the money clean. He needed Trent. Trent's arrogance suddenly made perfect sense. He was not just mocking me. He was gloating. He was standing in the doorway insulting my intelligence while actively laundering the very money Marcus had stolen from me. And Chloe, did she know? Was my own sister part of the plan to leave me destitute and take my inheritance? I backed away from the door, my heart pounding a steady rhythmic drumbeat in my chest. They thought I was just a desperate, heartbroken wife. They thought sending me back out into the storm would break my spirit completely. They underestimated the woman standing on their porch. Trent thought he was the professional wealth manager, but I was the auditor who designed the risk algorithms his firm relied on. They had not just stolen my money. They had used my own financial structures to do it. I turned my back on the pristine mansion and walked down the driveway into the pouring rain. I did not need their shelter. I did not need their pity. I pulled my wet hood over my head, my mind already running the calculations, mapping out the banking nodes, identifying every single vulnerability in Trent's corporate shield. The tears were gone. The victim they expected had died under that bridge. It was time to wake up the predator. The heavy oak door clicked shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the freezing rain. I stood on the pristine brick porch of my sister's mansion, staring at the brass knocker. 5 minutes ago, I was a desperate woman seeking refuge with my own flesh and blood. Now I was a casualty of a coordinated family strike. Marcus had stolen the money. Trent was washing it. And my sister Chloe, the woman who used to braid my hair and promise we would always protect each other, was sipping white wine while watching me drown. I stepped backward off the porch, the storm immediately swallowing me whole. The camera circles me in a slow, continuous arc, capturing the exact moment the final trace of my naivety died. I did not fall to my knees. I did not scream into the thunder. The overwhelming, suffocating pain that had paralyzed me for the last 72 hours simply evaporated. It was replaced by a hollow, calculating ice. They thought they had destroyed me. They thought stripping me of my dignity, my husband and my family would leave me powerless. They forgot that you should never back a financial risk auditor into a corner with nothing left to lose. I walked down the long, winding driveway, my muddy sneakers slapping against the wet pavement. I reached the bottom of the hill where my father's black SUV was still idling in the shadows. He had followed me from Marcus's estate, waiting to see if his prodigal daughter would finally shatter completely. I opened the heavy door and climbed into the passenger seat, soaking the custom leather. My father looked at me, his jaw clenched, waiting for the tears. He reached for a towel to hand me, expecting a breakdown. I did not take it. Dad, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I need you to make a phone call. He lowered the towel, his eyes narrowing as he studied my face. He saw the shift. Who are we calling, Nia? I am not asking you to get my money back, I told him, staring straight through the windshield at the relentless rain. I do not want your lawyers. I do not want your fixers. I need a sterile room at Davenport Logistics. I need a multi-monitor setup with military-grade encryption. And I need your highest-level security clearance to access the federal financial database. My father leaned back in his seat. The corner of his mouth twitched upward into a slow, dangerous smile. He recognized that tone. It was the same tone he used right before a hostile corporate takeover. What exactly are you planning to do? He asked softly. I am going to do my job, I replied, wiping the cold rain from my face. I am going to audit my husband, my brother-in-law, and my sister. I am going to tear their financial lives down to the studs. Within 2 hours, I was sitting inside a subterranean server room beneath Davenport headquarters. The damp clothes were gone, replaced by a sharp black turtleneck and slacks my father's assistant had procured. 4 massive monitors glowed in front of me, casting a pale blue light across my face. My fingers flew across the keyboard. This was my domain. For 5 years, I had exhausted myself managing corporate risk portfolios, identifying microscopic anomalies in ledgers, and building predictive models to stop fraud. Trent thought he was a mastermind because he wore custom Italian suits and managed private wealth for the Atlanta elite. He was about to learn the difference between a man who manages money and a woman who dismantles the systems that hide it. I started with the routing number I had memorized from the wire transfer slip sitting on Trent's console table. It was a thread, and I was going to pull it until their entire sweater unraveled. I bypassed the standard banking firewalls, using my father's corporate clearance, diving straight into the deep routing data. The first layer of Trent's defense was painfully obvious. He had structured the $20 million through a series of rapid microtransfers, scattering the funds across a dozen domestic accounts under Marcus's shell company, Cole Logistics. It was a classic smurfing technique designed to keep the transactions under the federal reporting threshold. It was sloppy, arrogant, and insulting to my intelligence. I isolated the domestic accounts in less than 20 minutes. But the money did not stay there. Trent was moving it offshore, wrapping the funds in layers of corporate anonymity to make it untraceable. I cracked my knuckles, my eyes darting across the screens as lines of code and transaction histories blurred past. I followed the digital paper trail to the Cayman Islands, then to a holding firm in Panama, and finally to a blind trust registered in Luxembourg. Trent had constructed a labyrinth of shell companies, each one owning a piece of the next, creating a loop of dead ends, meant to exhaust any forensic accountant who dared to look closely. I sat back in my chair, sipping black coffee, staring at the network map I had generated on the center monitor. It was a complex, beautiful web of corporate deceit. It was designed to be completely impenetrable. A normal investigator would need subpoenas, international warrants, and years of litigation to pierce the corporate veil. But I was not a normal investigator. I was looking at the screen, and a cold, sharp realization sent a shockwave straight down my spine. I leaned forward, my face inches from the glowing monitors. I pulled up the structural blueprint of the Luxembourg Trust and compared it to the specific routing logic of the Panamanian holding firm. I checked the algorithmic triggers governing the asset transfers. My breath caught in my throat. I let out a dry, humorless laugh that echoed in the empty server room. Trent had not invented this labyrinth. He had stolen it. 7 years ago, when I was a junior analyst on Wall Street, long before I met Marcus, I had authored a highly theoretical white paper on corporate asset shielding. It was a speculative model designed to highlight vulnerabilities in international banking protocols. I had created a proprietary algorithm, a specific mathematical sequence of moving funds through layered shell companies to render them entirely invisible to standard auditing software. I had presented the model at a private finance symposium. Trent had been in the audience. He had kept my blueprint. He had taken my brilliant theoretical design, the very architecture of my mind, and used it to launder my own money. It was the ultimate insult, but it was also his fatal mistake. Trent was a salesman playing with tools he did not truly understand. He had copied my architecture flawlessly, but because he was not the architect, he did not know about the back door. When I designed that algorithm, I built a mathematical kill switch into the routing logic, a tiny undetectable flaw in the transfer sequencing that would allow the original author to trigger an automatic asset recall if the system was ever weaponized. Trent thought he had locked the $20 million away in an impenetrable fortress. He had no idea he had handed me the remote control to the entire explosive payload. I placed my hands back on the keyboard, my fingers hovering over the keys. I did not just have the power to take my $20 million back. I had the power to trigger a systemic collapse of Trent's entire private wealth management firm. I could expose every single client account connected to that offshore network. I could ruin Marcus, Vonda, Chloe, and Trent with one keystroke. The beast inside me was fully awake, and it was starving for absolute destruction. I smiled at the screen and began to type. My fingers flew across the keyboard, executing lines of code that would systematically dismantle the offshore accounts Trent had so carefully constructed. The progress bar on the center monitor ticked toward 90%. I was minutes away from burying them completely. But I had underestimated the automated alert protocols Trent had installed in his firm's private network. A blaring red notification flashed across my screen. Someone was attempting a massive manual override from the outside. Trent had detected the breach. They knew I was in the system. I locked the terminal instantly and moved upstairs to my father's glass-walled executive suite to monitor the network from a clean laptop. I needed a secure vantage point to watch the trap finish compiling. 10 minutes later, the heavy mahogany doors of the executive suite burst open. The camera switches to a frantic handheld tracking shot, mimicking my rising pulse and the sudden suffocating chaos. Marcus and Vonda marched into the room, having bypassed my father's overnight security detail. I later learned Vonda had threatened to call the police and claim I was a disgruntled former employee having a violent psychiatric episode if they did not let her up immediately. Vonda slammed a thick leather binder onto the glass conference table. She was still wearing her emerald green gown from the champagne party, but her face was twisted in a mixture of absolute panic and pure malice. Did you really think you could hack into a private wealth management firm without setting off alarms? She hissed, leaning over the table, her diamond necklace swinging aggressively. You are acting like a desperate criminal. Nia, stop typing and listen to me right now, or I will have you arrested and thrown in a federal holding cell before midnight. Marcus stepped out from behind his mother. The confident, arrogant man who had been lounging on a white leather sofa just an hour ago was completely gone. In his place was a whining, manipulative coward playing the ultimate victim. Why are you doing this to us, Nia? He asked, his voice dripping with manufactured hurt. I tried to protect you. The feds were looking into your accounts. I moved that money to save you from your own mistakes. Why can you not just be a supportive wife for once in your entire life? The gaslighting was breathtaking. He was standing in my father's building, having stolen $20 million from my family trust, and he was genuinely trying to blame me. You forced my hand. Marcus continued pacing the length of the glass room. The camera jerked slightly, keeping him in sharp focus, as he waves his arms in exasperation. You cared more about your spreadsheets and your corporate promotions than you ever cared about me. You made me feel like a failure in my own home. If you had just given me a child, If you had just been a real woman instead of a corporate machine, I would not have had to secure my future this way. You left me absolutely no choice. I stared at the man I had slept next to for 5 years. He was using my greatest heartbreak, my struggle with infertility, as a weapon to justify his theft. Vonda did not give me a chance to respond. She opened the leather binder and shoved a stack of printed emails and banking statements across the glass table. Take a good look at your future, she sneered. I glanced down at the papers. They were meticulously forged documents. They painted a highly detailed picture of a rogue financial auditor embezzling millions of dollars to fund a secret catastrophic gambling addiction. They had used my old login credentials, manipulated my IP address, and manufactured a digital trail that led straight from my personal laptop to the Cayman Island accounts. It was a masterpiece of corporate framing. Trent has friends at the Securities and Exchange Commission, Vonda said, tapping a manicured nail against the fake audit report. He is ready to hand this entire file over to the federal authorities right now. Who do you think they will believe? A grieving, hardworking husband, or the unstable, barren wife whose digital footprint is all over the stolen accounts? You will spend 20 years in a federal penitentiary, unless you sign this. She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a digital tablet, dropping it onto the table in front of me. The screen displayed a dense, binding legal contract. It was a comprehensive waiver and a full confession. By signing it, I would officially relinquish any and all claims to the Davenport Trust, admit full fault for the financial discrepancies, and grant Marcus and his mother complete legal and civil immunity. The camera pushes in tight on my face, capturing the intense claustrophobia of the moment. Vonda and Marcus hovered over me, their shadows physically blocking the light in the room. The air felt heavy and thin. They thought they had backed me into an inescapable corner. They thought the threat of prison and public humiliation would break my resolve. They believed that because I had loved Marcus, I was inherently weak. I looked down at the glowing screen of the tablet. I looked up at Marcus, whose eyes were cold and impatient. I let my shoulders slump forward. I forced my breathing to turn ragged and shallow. I willed my eyes to well up with tears, playing the exact role of the broken, defeated woman they desperately wanted me to be. Fine, I whispered, my voice trembling perfectly as a single tear slipped down my cheek. Just leave me alone. Take the money and please just leave me alone. I picked up the digital stylus. My hand shook as I slowly scrawled my signature across the bottom of the glowing screen. Vonda snatched the device away the exact second the green confirmation checkmark appeared. She looked at the signature, then looked at me, a predatory grin exposing all her teeth. Smart girl, she mocked, slipping the tablet back into her bag. Enjoy your miserable, lonely life. Marcus did not even look at me. He turned on his heel and walked out the glass doors, his mother following close behind with her stolen prize. The heavy doors clicked shut, echoing in the quiet suite. The moment they were out of sight, the trembling in my hands stopped entirely. The tears instantly vanished from my eyes. I sat up straight, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. Vonda and Marcus were walking out of the building completely convinced they had won. They thought they had secured their stolen fortune and legally silenced me forever. They had absolutely no idea that the digital waiver Trent had prepared was tied directly to his firm's internal verification network. They did not realize that the moment my specific biometric signature hit their server, it would not release the funds or grant them immunity. It would execute the mathematical poison pill I had buried deep in the offshore code. I had not just signed away my money. I had just authorized a catastrophic, irreversible freeze on every single account, shell company, and domestic asset Marcus, Vonda, and Trent controlled. The trap was set, the door was locked, and they had just handed me the key. The digital poison pill did not just freeze the offshore accounts. It triggered a catastrophic cascade of automated security lockdowns across Trent's entire private wealth management firm. I sat in the subterranean server room of Davenport Logistics, watching the network traffic light up as Trent's servers desperately tried to stop the financial bleeding. He noticed the breach almost immediately. I could trace his frantic administrative logins from his Alpharetta IP address as he tried to override the freeze. But Trent was a man accustomed to absolute privilege and unchecked power. When he realized he was completely locked out of the Luxembourg Trust, he did not panic or attempt to cover his tracks. He got angry. He utilized his expensive security software to trace the origin of the network lock, following the digital breadcrumbs right back to the Davenport Logistics mainframe. Instead of realizing he had stepped into a fatal trap, his arrogance blinded him. He decided to flex his Wall Street muscles and crush my father's company. Less than 24 hours later, my father stormed into the server room. His usual stoic, calculated demeanor was gone, replaced by a rigid, simmering fury that seemed to drop the temperature in the room. He slammed a thick stack of printed financial reports onto the desk next to my keyboard. Trent had called in every favor he possessed in the financial sector. He had used his firm's massive leverage and his country club connections to freeze Davenport Logistics out of a critical operational line of credit. Two of my father's major international shipping contracts had just been suspended pending a sudden unexplained review by a banking consortium that Trent quietly controlled. Trent was intentionally suffocating my father's empire, attempting to choke our cash flow to force us to release the stolen $20 million. He was treating my family like a nuisance he could simply bankrupt into submission. My father leaned over my chair, his broad shoulders tense, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I am going to liquidate the Cayman reserves," he stated flatly. "I am going to buy out the entire banking consortium, crash his firm's stock by noon, and personally ensure that arrogant boy never works in finance again. I want a frontal assault, Nia. I want his business completely dismantled by tomorrow morning." I stopped typing and looked up at him. I shook my head slowly, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "Oh," I told him. "A frontal assault is exactly what he is waiting for. He expects you to throw money at this problem so he can run to his lawyers and paint Davenport Logistics as an aggressive corporate bully. He is relying on his white-collar network and his elite privilege to protect him from a direct financial war. If you fight him in the open, he will use his connections to drag you into a decade of litigation. We are not going to fight him, Dad. We are going to let the federal government do it for us." My father frowned, clearly frustrated by my restraint, but he crossed his arms and waited for me to explain the strategy. I turned back to the glowing monitors. "Trent built his entire career on the illusion of pristine legitimacy," I said, pulling up the massive data packet I had compiled during the night. I had captured every wire transfer, every forged signature, and the exact timestamps of Marcus and Vonda draining the trust. More importantly, I had undeniable proof that Trent was using my proprietary risk algorithm to launder the stolen funds. I mapped out the exact money laundering sequence, highlighting where Trent had bypassed anti-money laundering protocols. I made the evidence so overwhelmingly radioactive that any federal prosecutor would consider it a career-making case. I did not need to fight Trent in a boardroom. I just needed to hand the murder weapon to the right executioner. I established an encrypted anonymous proxy connection, routing my signal through servers in 3 different countries to completely mask my location. I bundled the entire forensic audit into a single undeniable digital dossier. I did not send it to local authorities who might be swayed by Trent's local influence. I bypassed the standard reporting channels and sent the package directly to the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission in Washington. I flagged the transmission with highly classified priority markers used only by internal banking whistleblowers. The federal government does not ignore $20 million of stolen funds moving through unlicensed offshore shell companies. I hit send, watching the data packet vanish into the digital ether. "Now we just sit back and wait," I told my father. The waiting did not last long. 48 hours later, Trent was sitting in his pristine corner office, completely confident that he had backed the Davenport family into a corner. He genuinely thought he had successfully squeezed my father's credit lines and secured Marcus's stolen fortune. He was completely unaware that the federal government was already dissecting every single transaction his firm had processed in the last 5 years. The news broke on a Thursday morning. I was monitoring Trent's corporate communications when the sheer panic hit his network. A team of SEC investigators backed by armed federal marshals walked straight into the marble lobby of his wealth management firm. They did not ask for a meeting. They served an emergency federal subpoena, locked down the entire building, and began physically seizing servers' hard drives and physical ledgers. I watched the internal chat logs of Trent's company explode with terrified messages from junior analysts and executives. Trent's arrogance finally shattered in an instant. He realized the system he thought he mastered was actively tearing his life apart. He scrambled out of his office, abandoning his staff to face the federal agents alone. He was desperately trying to reach his defense lawyers, completely panicked, as his pristine reputation disintegrated in real time on the financial news networks. But while Trent was running from the authorities, I was calmly executing the final lethal phase of my audit. Trent had heavily over-leveraged his own company to maintain his luxurious lifestyle, his mansion, and his aggressive corporate tactics. He had millions of dollars in personal and corporate debt floating in the secondary market packaged as high-yield bonds. His debt was collateralized against his firm's assets, his personal real estate, and his future earnings. As the news of the federal raid hit the wires, the market treated his bonds like toxic waste. The value of his firm's debt plummeted instantly. Investors panicked, desperately trying to offload anything connected to his failing firm. I did not hesitate for a single second. Using a newly formed anonymous holding company my father had funded, I began aggressively buying up every single scrap of Trent's debt for pennies on the dollar. My fingers flew across the keyboard, executing massive purchase orders through algorithmic trading while the market was in complete freefall. I scooped up his commercial paper, his mortgage-backed securities, and his leveraged loans. While Trent was fleeing from the feds, sweating in his tailored suit, and trying to figure out how to stay out of federal prison, I was calmly sitting in my father's basement, transferring ownership of his entire life into my hands. By the time Trent reached his luxury car in the parking garage, the transaction was complete. I consolidated his liabilities into a single massive portfolio. He thought he was driving away to formulate a legal defense. He did not know that he now belonged entirely to the uneducated black woman he had insulted on his front porch. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the confirmation screens. Trent was officially my property, and I was going to collect every single cent he owed. The scent of roasted rosemary garlic and expensive Pinot Grigio wafted through the vaulted ceilings of Chloe's Alpharetta estate. It was Sunday evening, exactly 3 days since the federal raid on Trent's private wealth management firm. From the outside, anyone would think the raid had been a fatal blow. But Trent was a man insulated by systemic privilege, and he believed he had already won. He believed his high-priced defense attorneys had successfully stalled the Securities and Exchange Commission with a barrage of corporate injunctions. More importantly, he believed a shadow corporate savior had miraculously swooped in during the market panic to buy up his failing debt, recapitalizing his firm, and saving him from total bankruptcy. I was throwing a victory dinner to celebrate his own genius. I walked up the same pristine brick pathway where I had stood shivering in the freezing rain just days prior. The storm had passed, leaving a crisp, clear night. I did not wear my tailored risk auditor suits. I wore a plain, oversized gray sweater and faded denim jeans, my hair pulled back into a messy, unremarkable knot. I let my shoulders slump forward, forcing the tension out of my spine, until I looked exactly like the broken, defeated, destitute woman they all desperately wanted me to be. I pressed the doorbell and waited, keeping my eyes fixed on the welcome mat. Chloe opened the door. She was wearing a stunning ivory silk dress, a diamond tennis necklace catching the warm light of the foyer. Her celebratory smile vanished the second she saw me, replaced by a tight, annoyed line. "Nia," she said, her tone dripping with exhaustion. "What are you doing here?" I kept my eyes downcast, wrapping my arms around my own torso, as if trying to make myself smaller. "I had nowhere else to go, Chloe," I whispered, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. "I am locked out of my accounts. I am sleeping in my car. Please, I just want to sit down, just for dinner." Chloe sighed, a performative display of long-suffering sisterly duty. She glanced over her shoulder toward the dining room, then stepped aside. "Fine. But do not ruin the mood. Trent has had a very stressful week and we are celebrating." I followed her into the formal dining room. The table was a masterpiece of suburban wealth, set with fine china crystal wine glasses and a massive floral centerpiece. Trent sat at the head of the mahogany table, looking relaxed in a tailored linen shirt, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. To his right sat Marcus and Vonda. Vonda was draped in an emerald green gown glittering with jewelry she had undoubtedly purchased with my family trust money. The conversation died the instant I walked into the room. The silence was absolute and suffocating. Vonda laughed first. It was a sharp, cruel scraping sound. "Look what the storm dragged in," she sneered, picking up her wineglass. "Have you come to beg for your allowance, Nia?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with a mixture of faux pity and deep arrogance. "I told you she would come crawling back once the reality of being broke set in. You cannot survive out there without my structures, Nia. You never could." Trent did not even offer me a chair. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his bourbon, his eyes raking over my plain gray sweater with utter disgust. "I thought you were going to destroy us, Nia," he mocked, his voice echoing in the large room. "Was that not the threat you made? You were going to tear our financial lives down to the studs. What happened to the big bad risk auditor?" I pulled out a chair at the very far end of the table, as far away from Trent as possible, and sat down quietly. I kept my hands folded in my lap. "I was wrong," I said softly, staring at the empty porcelain plate in front of me. "I overreacted. I was just hurt. I am not trying to fight you anymore. I just want peace." Trent let out a booming, theatrical laugh. He sliced into his steak completely in his element. "Of course you were wrong. You thought you could trigger a federal raid and sink me. You thought throwing a temper tantrum to the SEC would break a man like me. But you do not understand how real power works in this world, Nia. The SEC backed off. My lawyers buried them in injunctions. They cannot touch my offshore accounts." He pointed his steak knife at me, his eyes gleaming with supreme confidence. "And the market," Trent continued, leaning forward. "The market rewarded me. When the news of the raid hit, my debt depreciated. But an anonymous holding firm recognized the inherent value of my portfolio. They bought up my outstanding debt in a massive block purchase. I am fully recapitalized. I have a silent partner who believes in my vision. I am invincible. You just made a fool of yourself for absolutely nothing." I kept my eyes on my plate. I did not blink. I did not let my expression shift. My heart was beating at a slow, steady resting pace. I was not angry. I was a surgeon holding a scalpel, listening to the patient boast about how healthy he was, right before I made the fatal incision. Trent had no idea that the anonymous holding firm he was praising was completely controlled by me. He was sitting at the head of the table, bragging about how he had outsmarted the system, completely unaware that he was currently breathing only because I had not yet tightened the leash around his neck. Chloe chimed in, pouring more wine into Marcus's glass. "It is honestly embarrassing, Nia. You tried to ruin my husband because your own marriage failed. Marcus just wanted what was rightfully his. You should apologize to him. And to Vonda. We are a respectable family, and you are acting like a street thug." Marcus looked down the length of the table at me, assuming the role of the benevolent patriarch. "I can give you a small allowance, Nia," he offered generously. "Just enough to get a one-bedroom apartment in a cheaper part of the city. But you have to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. You will never speak about my business or Trent's business again." Vonda nodded in aggressive agreement. "And a public apology," she added. "We cannot have you slandering our good name. You will write a letter to our country club admitting that your accusations were the result of a hysterical mental breakdown." I let them talk. I let them gorge themselves on their own inflated egos. I focused on the intricate lace pattern of the tablecloth, letting the insults wash over me. The camera perspective closes in tight on my face, capturing the stark contrast between the vicious mockery echoing in the room and the total unblinking serenity in my eyes. I was waiting for the peak. I was waiting for the exact moment of their supreme arrogance. Trent raised his crystal glass for a toast. "To family," he declared, looking right at me with a venomous, triumphant smirk. "And to knowing your place in it." Chloe, Marcus, and Vonda eagerly raised their glasses. The crystal clinked together in a harmonious, celebratory chime. I reached into the pocket of my faded jeans and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen once. I did not say a word. I did not shout or defend myself. I simply slid the phone down the polished mahogany table until it rested dead center right next to the floral centerpiece. The volume was turned all the way up. The audio was crystal clear. It had been intercepted from Marcus's heavily encrypted burner phone just 48 hours ago, pulled directly from the routing data I had seized during my server room audit. Marcus's voice echoed through the dining room, arrogant, greedy, and completely unfiltered. "Trent is a complete idiot," the recorded voice of Marcus sneered. "He thinks he is the mastermind because he wears custom Italian suits and plays golf, but he is doing all the heavy lifting for me." Trent's wineglass stopped halfway to his mouth. The smug smile froze on his face. Chloe went entirely rigid in her chair. Vonda's eyes widened in sheer horror, her hand flying to her throat. The recording continued, filling the dead silence of the room. "I am skimming 15% off the top of every single transfer he makes to the Caymans." Marcus's voice boasted through the phone speaker. "He has absolutely no idea. He thinks he is managing my money, but I am robbing him blind on the transaction fees. And the best part." A cruel, familiar chuckle crackled through the audio. "Once Trent finishes washing the trust money, I am going to have my mother file a fraudulent shell claim against Chloe's personal estate. Trent is so busy fighting the SEC and trying to save his own firm, he will not even notice we are draining his wife's personal accounts until they are completely empty. We take the family money, we take Chloe's money, and we leave those two snobs holding the bag." The recording clicked off. The silence in the dining room was absolute, heavy, and violently suffocating. The air had been sucked completely out of the room. The impenetrable alliance of thieves had just shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Trent slowly turned his head, his face purple with homicidal rage, locking his eyes onto Marcus. Chloe dropped her wineglass. It shattered against the hardwood floor, dark red wine splashing across her pristine white shoes. Vonda looked like she was about to be physically sick. I looked up from my empty plate. I dropped the defeated, broken facade in an instant. I straightened my spine, rolling my shoulders back as I looked at the devastation I had just unleashed. I met Trent's furious eyes, then Chloe's terrified stare, and finally locked onto Marcus, whose face was completely drained of blood. My smile was razor sharp. "To family," I said softly. The crystal glass had not even settled on the table before the explosion occurred. The silence held for exactly 1 second, suspended in the air like a physical weight before Trent's elite country club composure completely violently shattered. He did not care about the fine bone china. He did not care about the baccarat crystal. With a primal roar, Trent lunged across the mahogany table, sweeping his arms outward in a massive arc. He sent plates, silverware, and a silver platter of roasted rosemary chicken crashing into the silk drapes. Wine glasses shattered against the hardwood floor, spraying red liquid across the pristine white walls. Trent's hands clamped onto the lapels of Marcus's custom-tailored suit, hauling the younger man halfway over the ruined floral centerpiece. "You pathetic bottom-feeding parasite," Trent screamed, spit flying from his lips as he shook Marcus like a rag doll. "You actually thought you could steal from me? I built this empire. I am the only reason you are not rotting in a federal holding cell right now, and you have the audacity to skim my transfers." Marcus scrambled wildly, his polished loafer kicking at the table leg as he tried to break Trent's grip. The smooth-talking hustler was instantly gone, replaced by a terrified, cornered rat. "It is a deep fake, Trent," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking, high-pitched and desperate. "Nia fabricated the audio. She is a tech auditor. She sliced the voice clips together to frame me." Trent slammed Marcus back down into his chair with enough force to splinter the wooden backrest. "Do not insult my intelligence," Trent barked, a thick vein pulsing dangerously in his forehead. "I saw the transaction discrepancies yesterday morning. I thought it was a banking error. I thought my routing logic had a glitch. But it was you. You stupid, uneducated grifter. You tried to rob the man keeping you out of prison." Vonda erupted from her seat. She abandoned all pretense of her newly acquired emerald green elegance, transforming instantly into a shrieking banshee. She threw herself at Trent, clawing at his linen shirt with her manicured acrylic nails. "Take your filthy hands off my son!" she screamed, her diamond necklace snapping in the scuffle and scattering stones across the flooded floor like cheap gravel. "You arrogant white-collar thief! You were using my boy as a scapegoat anyway. You needed a fall guy for your dirty offshore accounts, and you thought Marcus was dumb enough to just hand it over." Trent shoved Vonda backward with a sharp thrust of his forearm. She crashed heavily into the serving buffet, bringing down a silver tray of grilled asparagus and a crystal water pitcher. "Your son is a massive liability," Trent shouted, his face purple with homicidal rage. "I gave him the keys to the castle and he tried to rob the king." Marcus scrambled out of his broken chair, quickly positioning his mother between himself and Trent. "You are no king, Trent. You are under federal investigation." Marcus sneered, his cowardice turning into desperate bravado. "You think I do not know the SEC raided your firm on Thursday? You are going down and I am not going to let you drag me down with you. I took what I needed to protect my own blood." The camera shifts focus, cutting away from the brawling triad to focus sharply on my sister. Chloe was backed flat against the custom silk wallpaper, her hands clamped tightly over her mouth. The pristine, highly curated suburban reality she had traded her soul for was disintegrating right in front of her eyes. Her husband was a money launderer facing federal prison. Her sister's husband was a petty thief plotting to drain her personal accounts. She slowly slid down the wall, her ivory silk dress soaking up the red wine pooled on the floor, ruining the fabric instantly. "My accounts!" Chloe hyperventilated, her eyes darting between Marcus and Trent in absolute horror. The SEC raid did not break her, but the personal betrayal shattered her completely. "You were going to steal my personal money, the children's college funds." Marcus did not even look at her, his eyes locked on Trent. "Oh, grow up, Chloe." Marcus spat dismissively. "Your husband was going to let me take the fall for a $20 million wire fraud. It was survival of the fittest. You would have done the exact same thing to me." The camera angle changes, pulling back from the chaos to execute a slow, deliberate 360-degree pan around my chair. I did not move to intervene. I did not flinch at the shattering glass, the screaming, or the physical violence. I calmly reached forward, picked up my glass of white wine, and took a slow, measured sip. I sat in the dead center of the storm, completely untouched by the debris. This was the beautiful mathematics of risk management. I watched the predators I had gathered at this table turn their fangs on each other. They had spent years feeding off my hard work, my financial structures, and my blind trust. They thought their alliance of greed made them untouchable. But predators have no loyalty. Starved of their mutual deception, they were now eating each other alive. I had not just planted a seed of doubt. I had poured high-octane gasoline over their entire ecosystem and calmly handed them the match. "Stop it!" Chloe shrieked, clamping her hands over her ears, unable to process the collapse of her perfect life. "All of you just stop it right now. Trent, fix this. You said you had a silent partner. You said you recapitalized the firm. Just give Marcus his cut and get him out of my house." Trent stood panting heavily, his tailored shirt torn at the collar, his knuckles bleeding slightly from where he had struck the table. The mention of his firm and his supposed silent partner seemed to snap him back to his core instincts of self-preservation. He straightened his ruined collar, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with a desperate, manic intensity. "You are getting absolutely nothing," Trent snarled at Marcus, taking a step back to retrieve his phone from his trousers. "You are officially cut out. I am freezing the Luxembourg nodes right now. I am pulling the entire 20 million back into the primary holding firm. I will wash it through the new capital lines myself, and when the feds finish their audit, they are going to find a pristine ledger. And you, Marcus, are going to be left holding the bag for the initial domestic transfers. I am going to feed you to the SEC." Vonda let out a hysterical, breathless laugh, wiping spilled water from her dress. "You cannot do that. That is our money. Marcus stole that fair and square from her father's trust. You cannot just lock us out." "Watch me," Trent sneered. His thumb flew across his phone screen as he opened his highly encrypted private banking application. "I built the routing architecture. I control the shell companies. You are nothing without my access codes." I took another sip of wine, letting the cool, crisp liquid slide down my throat. I watched Trent's face with intense clinical focus. I waited for the precise, agonizing millisecond his eyes registered the data on the screen. Trent's thumb stopped moving. The arrogant sneer froze on his face. It did not fade. It was instantly wiped away, replaced by a slack-jawed mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He tapped the screen again, harder this time. His finger jabbed at the glass display. He refreshed the application. He backed out to the main menu, his hands beginning to shake violently, and re-entered the master administrative portal using his biometric thumbprint. His breathing grew shallow, turning into rapid, panicked wheezes. "No," Trent whispered. The word barely escaped his lips, sounding like a dying gasp. "No, no, no. That is impossible." "What is it?" Chloe demanded, scrambling up from the floor, the wine stains looking like dried blood on her dress. "Trent, what is happening?" Marcus lunged forward, grabbing Trent by the shoulders. "What did you do with my money, Trent? Where is it?" Trent did not fight him off. He did not push Marcus away. He let Marcus rip the phone straight out of his trembling hands. Trent simply stared straight ahead, at the ruined wall, his eyes wide and vacant, a man watching his executioner drop the blade. Marcus looked down at the screen. It was the master dashboard for the offshore labyrinth, the holding accounts in Panama, the blind trust in Luxembourg, the domestic shells in Atlanta. Every single node was displayed in a clean, minimalist interface. Marcus dropped the phone. It slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the shattered remains of the dinner plates, the screen glowing brightly in the dim light of the dining room. I did not need to look at it to know what it said. I had programmed the user interface myself. The total aggregate balance across all 52 offshore accounts, the entire $20 million payload they had destroyed my life to steal, was flashing in bold, undeniable text. Balance, $0. Trent tore the phone from Marcus with a feral snarl. He stared down at the glowing screen. His chest stopped moving. His breath hitched in his throat. The number 0 stared back at him, mocking his entire existence. $20 million of carefully laundered, highly secured offshore capital had been entirely vaporized. The absolute certainty that had defined Trent his entire life, fractured in a single heartbeat. He tapped the screen frantically, his thumb slipping against the glass. He hit refresh. He swiped back to the global ledger. Every single account connected to his firm, every shell company in Panama, every blind trust in Luxembourg showed the exact same catastrophic balance. 0. Marcus stumbled backward, his legs tangling in the legs of his broken dining chair. He crashed to the floor, crab walking away from Trent in pure, unadulterated terror. He pointed a trembling finger at the head of the table. "You lost it!" Marcus screamed, his voice pitching into a hysterical shriek. "You arrogant fool! You let the feds seize the primary accounts. You told me the network was secure." Trent did not look at Marcus. He slowly lifted his head, his wide, bloodshot eyes locking directly onto me. The realization struck him with the force of a freight train. He remembered the anonymous holding firm that had miraculously bought up his toxic debt during the market panic. He remembered the precise surgical efficiency of the initial digital freeze that had started this entire nightmare. It was not the Securities and Exchange Commission acting alone. It was an inside job. It was me. "You," Trent choked out. His face drained of its healthy golf course tan, leaving behind a sickly pale gray mask. "You drained the international nodes." I set my wine glass down. The soft clink of the crystal against the wood was the only sound in the room. "I did not steal a single cent, Trent." I replied, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. "I simply executed a forensic audit of your fraudulent transfers. I isolated the stolen Davenport funds, mapped your entire money laundering sequence, and redirected my family's money back to a highly secure, fully legitimate federal trust. I also took the liberty of freezing your personal domestic assets to prevent capital flight. You are completely broke." Before Trent could lunge across the table, before Vonda could unleash another screeching insult, the world outside the dining room exploded. A harsh, pulsing storm of red and blue lights suddenly washed through the sheer silk curtains, painting the dining room in the chaotic colors of a crime scene. Heavy, synchronized footsteps pounded aggressively up the pristine brick pathway. There was no polite knock. There was no ringing of the doorbell. The heavy custom oak front door was breached with a deafening, splintering crash that shook the crystal chandelier hanging above our heads. Armed federal agents poured into the grand foyer like a tactical tidal wave. They wore dark Kevlar vests, with the letters FBI emblazoned across their chests in bright yellow. This was no longer a polite white-collar corporate inquiry. This was the full-scale coordinated criminal raid. "Stay exactly where you are," the lead agent roared. He stepped into the dining room, his stance wide, his hand resting firmly on his holstered weapon. "Trent Davenport, Marcus Williams, keep your hands where I can see them. You are both under arrest." Marcus did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He immediately threw his hands high into the air and dropped flat onto his stomach on the wine-soaked hardwood floor. He started sobbing instantly, a pathetic weeping mess. He began babbling uncontrollably, his voice muffled against the floorboards. "It was all Trent," Marcus cried out. "Trent set up the shell companies. Trent forced me to do it. I will testify. I will tell you everything you want to know." Vonda covered her face and wailed. She screamed wildly as two tactical agents hauled her son up by the back of his collar. They forced his arms behind his back and secured heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. The loud, sharp ratcheting sound of the cuffs locking into place echoed through the room, but Trent did not surrender. His systemic privilege ran so incredibly deep that it completely blinded him to the guns, the federal badges, and the absolute reality of his destruction. He refused to accept that the rules applied to him. He straightened his ruined linen shirt, puffed out his chest, and marched directly toward the lead federal agent. He moved with the indignant, righteous fury of a wealthy man who had been given the wrong table at an exclusive country club. "Do you have any idea whose house you just broke into?" Trent demanded, his voice booming with entitled, arrogant authority. "I am Trent Davenport. I play golf with the mayor of this city every single Sunday. The district attorney was a groomsman at my wedding. You have made a catastrophic jurisdictional error, and I will personally ensure that every single one of you loses your pension. I demand you step outside my home immediately while I contact my legal team." The lead federal agent did not blink. He did not flinch at the threats. He simply stepped forward and firmly grabbed Trent by the right shoulder. Trent slapped the agent's hand away with a look of utter revulsion. "Do not touch me," Trent barked, his face turning an ugly, furious shade of crimson. "I am a licensed wealth manager. I am a pillar of this community. This is a simple corporate misunderstanding. You cannot treat me like some common street criminal. I know my rights and I know your superiors." That was his final fatal mistake. The agent did not argue with him. He did not ask a second time. The agent grabbed Trent by the back of his expensive collar, spun him around, and drove him face first into the custom silk wallpaper. The impact was violent and hard, rattling the framed artwork on the walls. Trent let out a breathless grunt of pure shock. His arm was violently wrenched behind his back, pinned high between his shoulder blades. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, aggravated money laundering, and conspiracy to commit extortion," the agent stated calmly, his voice completely devoid of sympathy. He pressed Trent flush against the wall, reading him his rights with practiced efficiency. "Your offshore accounts have been permanently seized by the federal government. Your firm is currently being liquidated to pay restitution. You have the right to remain silent, and considering the evidence we have, I highly suggest you start using it." Trent's legs completely gave out beneath him. The grand illusion of his untouchable power, his elite network, and his pristine reputation evaporated into nothing. He went entirely limp. Two agents dragged him backward toward the shattered front door, his expensive Italian leather shoes scraping helplessly against the hardwood floor. He looked small, weak, and utterly pathetic. Chloe stood frozen against the far wall. She watched her powerful, wealthy husband being hauled out of her home like a sack of garbage. Her perfect suburban castle was destroyed. Her dining room was an active crime scene. Her elite social standing was permanently annihilated. She was going to be on the front page of every financial news network by morning. She spun around and looked at me. I was the only person left in the room, not in handcuffs, not screaming, and not crying. I was calmly sitting at the far end of the table, casually smoothing out the fabric of my plain gray sweater. "Nia," Chloe gasped, her voice trembling with raw panic. She rushed toward me, her ivory silk dress dragging through the spilled wine and shattered glass. She grabbed my arm, her manicured fingers digging desperately into my skin. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in thick, dark rivers, completely ruining her flawless makeup. "Nia, please," Chloe begged, her voice pitching into a hysterical whine. "You have to tell them, tell the agents, this is a massive mistake. You know people in the government. You work in high-level risk management. You have to vouch for us. Tell them we are a good, respectable family. We are your family. Please, Nia. I will lose absolutely everything. The estate, the cars, my country club friends. I cannot be investigated. I cannot go to federal prison. I cannot be poor. I looked down at her, shaking hands, clutching my sleeve. I felt no pity. I felt no sisterly obligation. I felt absolutely nothing but the cold, clean satisfaction of total equilibrium. I reached over and peeled her fingers off my arm one by one with absolute surgical precision. I stepped back, creating a cold, physical distance between us. I looked at her ruined designer dress, her terrified, tear-streaked eyes, and the utter desperation radiating from her entire body. I let a slow, freezing smile cross my face. Khu phố thượng lưu này không hợp với năng lượng nghèo hèn của em đâu chị gái, để em gọi Uber cho chị nhé. Marcus watched the brutal takedown of Trent with wide, terrified eyes. He was already kneeling on the wine-soaked floor, his hands locked tightly behind his back, in heavy steel cuffs. The reality of federal prison was crashing down on him, but his mother was not ready to surrender. Vonda possessed a survival instinct built entirely on deceit. She took one look at the federal agents securing the dining room perimeters and decided her only way out was through the back doors. She slowly backed away from the shattered dining table, her expensive emerald green gown rustling softly against the hardwood floor. She kept her hands raised defensively, inching toward the sprawling kitchen that led to the outdoor terrace. She thought the chaos of Trent being dragged through the foyer would provide enough cover for her to slip away into the night. She was wrong. Two heavily armed agents stepped out from the kitchen shadows, completely blocking the archway. They did not raise their weapons, but their stance was an impenetrable wall. "Nobody leaves the premises," the taller agent stated, his voice a low, authoritative rumble. "The property is completely locked down." Vonda let out a sharp, panicked gasp. She spun around, her eyes darting frantically across the room until they locked onto me. The transformation was instantaneous and utterly revolting. The vicious, sneering matriarch who had just mocked my plain clothes and my bank account vanished. In her place stood a trembling, pathetic woman desperately trying to save her own skin. She ignored her own son, who was currently weeping on the floor in handcuffs. She rushed toward me, falling to her knees right beside my chair. She reached out, her hands shaking as she tried to grasp my denim jeans. "Nia, my sweet girl," Vonda wailed, forcing thick, theatrical tears to stream down her heavily powdered cheeks. "You have to tell them I had absolutely nothing to do with this. I am just a mother. I am just an innocent old woman. Trent is a monster. He manipulated Marcus. He dragged my poor, foolish boy into this dangerous scheme. I never wanted Marcus to leave you, Nia. You were always my beloved daughter-in-law. I always knew you were the smart one. Please, you have to protect me. I have a weak heart. I cannot go to a federal holding facility." I sat perfectly still. I did not pull my leg away from her grasping hands. I simply looked down at her with the cold, detached fascination of a scientist observing a parasite. "You always were a terrible actress, Vonda," I said, my voice completely flat, cutting through her hysterical sobbing like a scalpel. "You are not a victim. You were the primary beneficiary of the entire laundering operation." Vonda gasped in mock horror, pressing a hand to her chest. "No, Nia, I swear to you, I did not know where the money was coming from. Marcus just told me his investments were paying off. I am innocent." I picked up my phone from the mahogany table. I opened a digital dossier I had prepared specifically for this exact moment. "I did not know," I repeated, letting a small, humorless smile touch my lips. "That is a fascinating defense. Let us review the asset ledger, shall we?" I swiped the screen, projecting a series of high-resolution financial documents directly onto the large smart television mounted on the dining room wall. The federal agents in the room turned their attention to the screen, their eyes narrowing as the evidence illuminated the dark room. "3 months ago," I stated, my voice echoing clearly over Vonda's pathetic whimpers, "you opened a private safety deposit box in downtown Atlanta under your maiden name. You did not deposit cash. You deposited jewelry. Specifically, a vintage diamond tennis bracelet, a pair of platinum heirloom earrings, and a custom sapphire pendant." Vonda froze. The fake tears instantly stopped. Her face drained of all color. "Those pieces belonged to my late mother." I continued, my gaze boring a hole straight through her. When Marcus packed his bags and abandoned our marriage, he did not just take his clothes. He raided my private safe. He handed my mother's heirlooms directly to you. And instead of returning them, you used them as collateral to secure a bridge loan from an unlicensed private lender. You leveraged my dead mother's jewelry to fund your own lavish lifestyle. I did not. Vonda stammered, her eyes darting nervously toward the federal agents who were now taking keen interest in the presentation. Marcus gave those to me as a gift. I thought he bought them. You pawned stolen goods, I corrected sharply. But that is just a minor felony compared to your real estate portfolio. I tapped the screen again. The images of the jewelry vanished, replaced by a glaring high-definition photograph of a massive 10,000 square foot luxury estate in the Buckhead district. It was the house Vonda currently lived in, a sprawling mansion with a gated driveway and a pristine pool. When Marcus began skimming money from Trent's offshore accounts, he needed a place to park the cash domestically without triggering an IRS audit, I explained, looking directly at the lead agent. He could not put it in his own name, so he used his mother. Vonda, you signed the deed on this Buckhead estate just 4 weeks ago. You purchased it for $4.2 million. You put down $1.5 million in cash stolen directly from my family trust, and you financed the rest through a boutique shell mortgage company. Vonda scrambled to her feet, her voice rising in a desperate, shrill panic. The house is in my name, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the television screen. It is legally mine. You cannot touch it. The feds cannot touch it. It is my primary residence. I signed the paperwork. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. You are right, Vonda. You did sign the paperwork. But you did not read the fine print. The Buckhead estate was financed through a shadow lending firm called Apex Capital Holdings, I said softly. Marcus chose them because they did not require standard income verification, making them the perfect vehicle for washing stolen cash. What Marcus did not know, and what you failed to realize, is that Apex Capital Holdings is a subsidiary of Davenport Logistics. My father owns the firm. Vonda's mouth dropped open. She stopped breathing entirely. I personally underwrote your mortgage, I whispered, letting the absolute horror of the situation sink into her bones. I approved the loan, and I embedded an aggressive zero-tolerance default clause in the contract. If the primary accounts funding the mortgage were ever frozen, the loan would enter immediate, irrevocable foreclosure. No grace period, no legal appeals, immediate asset seizure. Vonda shook her head violently, taking a stumbling step backward. No, no, my accounts are fine. I have automatic payments set up. You had automatic payments set up, I corrected. But 30 minutes ago, I froze every single node in Marcus's financial network. Your automatic payment bounced. You defaulted on a multi-million-dollar federal loan. Right on cue. Vonda's designer clutch sitting on a side table began to buzz. It was a harsh, persistent vibration. The federal agent standing near the archway picked up the bag, unclasped it, and pulled out her phone. He glanced at the caller ID, then looked at me with a grim nod. Answer it, Vonda, I commanded. The agent handed her phone over. Vonda pressed it to her ear with shaking hands. Hello, she whispered. The voice on the other end was loud enough for me to hear from my chair. It was the private security firm hired by Apex Capital Holdings, accompanied by the local sheriff's department. They were calling to inform her that they were currently standing inside her Buckhead mansion. They were changing the locks, seizing the vehicles in the driveway, and boxing up every single piece of furniture, jewelry, and designer clothing she had purchased with stolen money. Vonda dropped the phone. It cracked against the floor. She let out a guttural, agonizing scream that tore from the bottom of her lungs. My house, she wailed, pulling at her hair in pure devastation. My things. You cannot do this. I have nowhere to go. I have nothing. A tactical agent stepped forward, completely unmoved by her screaming. He reached out and firmly unclasped the heavy, glittering emerald necklace from around Vonda's neck. It is considered evidence of wire fraud, ma'am, the agent stated coldly, dropping the expensive jewelry into a plastic evidence bag. Vonda stood frozen in the center of the ruined dining room. Her son was weeping in handcuffs on the floor. The wealthy financial sponsor they had leeched off was being dragged out in federal custody. Her sprawling mansion was gone. Her bank accounts were vaporized. "You are going to walk out of this house tonight, Vonda," I said, my voice ringing out with absolute final authority. "You have no car. You have no credit cards. You have absolutely no leverage left in this world. You are going to step out into the cold night, wearing nothing but that ridiculous green dress, and you are going to realize exactly what it feels like to have your entire life stolen from you." The federal agents did not give her a chance to argue. Two officers grabbed her by the arms, dragging her toward the shattered front door. Vonda kicked and screamed, a pathetic thrashing mess of ruined entitlement, her wails echoing into the quiet suburban night as she was thrown out onto the street. I stayed in my chair, taking one final deliberate sip of my wine as the front door was permanently shut behind her. The front door clicked shut, cutting off Vonda's shrieks and plunging the shattered dining room into a suffocating dead silence. The estate, once a pristine monument to Trent and Chloe's obscene wealth, was now a disaster zone of broken crystal-crushed porcelain and dark red wine pooled across the expensive hardwood floor. Two federal agents stood stoically by the arched entryway, silently securing the room, while their colleagues processed the digital evidence outside. And then there was Marcus. My ex-husband was still on the floor, his custom-tailored suit stained with Cabernet and covered in the dust of broken plates. With Trent dragged away in federal custody and his mother cast out onto the cold street with absolutely nothing, the reality of his utter isolation finally fractured his remaining sanity. He awkwardly struggled to his knees, his hands locked tightly behind his back in heavy steel cuffs. He shuffled forward, dragging his knees across the ruined hardwood until he reached the edge of my chair. He looked up at me. His face, the handsome, charismatic face that had effortlessly charmed my family and deceived me for 5 long years, was a swollen, pathetic mess of snot and tears. From where I sat looking down at his pathetic, upward tilted face, the shift in our power dynamic was absolute. The low angle magnified his complete wretchedness. He was stripped of his stolen millions, his arrogant swagger, and his protective mother. He was nothing but a hollow, terrified shell. "Nia, please," Marcus choked out, his voice cracking into a high, desperate pitch. "You have to stop this. You are the only one who can stop this. Tell them I was coerced. Tell them Trent forced me to wire the money and set up the shell accounts. I am your husband, Nia. 5 years. We spent 5 years together. You cannot let them put me in a cage." I stared down at him. I did not move a single muscle. I did not offer a single ounce of comfort. "I loved you, Nia," he sobbed, leaning forward and burying his face against the fabric of my denim jeans, leaving a wet stain of tears. "I always loved you. I was just stupid. I was intimidated by your family wealth and your father's empire. I wanted to build something for us to prove I was worthy of you. I swear on my life everything I did, because I wanted to provide for you. Please, baby, remember our anniversary in Paris. Remember how happy we were before all this business got in the way. Do not throw away everything we had over a stupid financial mistake." I slowly set my wine glass down on the only unbroken section of the mahogany table. The sharp clink of the crystal echoed like a gavel strike in the quiet room. I reached down and firmly grabbed Marcus by his jaw, my fingers digging into his skin as I lifted his head. I forced him to look directly into my eyes. My grip was unyielding. "You are invoking our marriage," I said, my voice dropping to a low, razor-sharp whisper. "You are invoking the 5 years we spent together, pretending that you ever viewed me as anything more than an ATM. That is a very bold strategy, Marcus. Especially considering the lengths you went to ensure our marriage was entirely built on a foundation of severe psychological torture." Marcus blinked, his tears momentarily halting as genuine confusion crossed his face. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his breath hitching in his throat. "I just made a bad investment choice with the trust. I got greedy, that is all." I released his jaw and picked up my phone. I did not open the financial dossier this time. I opened a separate, highly secure encrypted file. "While I was tracking the IP addresses you used to route my family trust into Trent's offshore accounts, I noticed a recurring payment history to a private medical facility in downtown Atlanta." I explained coldly, my eyes locked onto his. At first, I thought you were just using my family's money to pay for expensive cosmetic procedures or private trainers. But I am a thorough auditor, Marcus. I cross-referenced the billing codes. I bypassed their security and pulled the actual medical records. Marcus stopped breathing. His body went entirely rigid against my legs. I turned the phone screen around and held it up to his face. For 3 years of our marriage, I continued my voice perfectly steady, despite the searing ancient anger burning in my chest. I went to countless fertility specialists. I endured painful hormone injections. I spent night after night crying on the bathroom floor, completely destroyed by the fact that I could not give us a child. And every single time you would sit right next to me. You would hold my hand, stroke my hair, and tell me that it was okay. You told me that my body was just stressed. You told me that we just had to keep trying, but that it was probably my fault because of my demanding career as an auditor. You watched me break down month after month, consumed by the agonizing guilt that I was barren and failing you as a wife. Marcus tried to look away from the glowing screen, his eyes darting frantically toward the floor, but I shoved the phone closer to his face. Read the date on that medical file, Marcus, I commanded. He squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head frantically. Nia, please do not do this. Do not do this right now. Read it. I snapped, my voice echoing like a gunshot through the dining room. He swallowed hard, opening his terrified eyes to look at the highlighted medical document. The bold black text was undeniable. It was dated 14 months before our wedding day. You had a surgical vasectomy before you even proposed to me, I stated, laying the ultimate truth bare for the federal agents in the room to hear. You permanently sterilized yourself because you knew exactly what you were planning to do. You were planning to infiltrate my family, siphon my trust fund, and disappear the moment you had enough cash. You did not want a child, because a child is a permanent legal tie. You wanted a clean getaway. So you deliberately mutilated your own reproductive system, married me, and then spent half a decade gaslighting me into believing my body was broken. You watched me cry over a biological impossibility that you secretly orchestrated. The complete monstrous depravity of his actions hung heavily in the air. The two federal agents standing near the doorway exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. They had arrested hundreds of white-collar financial criminals, but the psychological sadism Marcus had inflicted upon his own wife was on an entirely different level of evil. Marcus was completely paralyzed. The charismatic mask, the pathetic victim routine, the tears of a desperate husband begging for mercy, everything vanished. He was entirely exposed. The sociopathic parasite beneath the tailored suit was finally laid bare under the harsh fluorescent lights of the dining room. He had no excuses left. He had no lies left to spin. The silence that followed was the sound of his entire world ending. You are not a man who made a financial mistake, I said, leaning down so my face was inches from his. You are a predator. You fed on my empathy, my resources, and my sanity. You thought my silence meant I was weak. You thought my tears meant I was easily controlled. But you forgot one fundamental truth about me, Marcus. I am an auditor. I balance the ledgers, and your account is egregiously overdrawn. I sat back in my chair, slipping the phone back into my pocket. I looked at the lead federal agent standing by the door. I believe we are finished here, I said calmly. The agent nodded, his jaw set in a hard, uncompromising line. He marched forward, grabbing Marcus by the back of his ruined suit jacket and hauling him roughly to his feet. Marcus's legs wobbled, his knees buckling under the sheer weight of his impending doom as the agent twisted him toward the exit. Marcus Williams, the agent stated, his voice booming with absolute authority over the wreckage of the room, you are being taken into federal custody. Based on the digital evidence provided, you are being formally charged with first-degree wire fraud conspiracy to commit grand larceny and interstate financial extortion. Marcus began to hyperventilate, twisting uselessly against the agent's iron grip. Nia, no, please, you cannot let them take me. I will give the money back. I will sign whatever you want. I will do anything you ask. I am begging you. I picked up my wine glass, taking a final, deeply satisfying sip of the crisp vintage. The money is already back in my family's trust, Marcus, I said, giving him a cold, dismissive smile. You have absolutely nothing left to offer me. The agent shoved Marcus toward the ruined entryway. With the consecutive charges, the federal prosecutor is preparing, the agent added, giving Marcus a sharp push forward into the foyer. You are looking at a mandatory minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary. I highly suggest you get used to tight spaces. No, Marcus screamed, his voice tearing at the seams as they dragged him out of the dining room. Nia, Nia. His pathetic screams echoed down the long hallway, growing fainter as the agents hauled him out the front door and shoved him violently into the back of a waiting armored transport vehicle. The heavy metal doors slammed shut, cutting off his cries completely. I sat alone in the wreckage of the Alpharetta estate. The shattered glass, the ruined silk drapes, and the spilled wine painted a beautiful portrait of absolute destruction. I had not thrown a single punch. I had not raised my voice. I had simply gathered the wolves, locked them in a room, and let them destroy each other. I took a deep breath, savoring the profound, quiet peace that finally washed over me. The debt was settled in full. 72 hours later, the financial world of Atlanta was still trembling from the shockwaves. Trent Davenport's spectacular downfall dominated every major news network. The federal raid had unraveled a labyrinth of wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering that left the city's elite scrambling to distance themselves from his toxic name. Marcus was denied bail, sitting in a federal detention center facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Vonda had practically vanished, absorbed into the harsh reality of the streets after being evicted with nothing but the clothes on her back. The debt was settled in full, but the final dying embers of their greed had not yet burned out. I sat in the heavy leather armchair across from my father in his private executive suite at Davenport Logistics. Winston Davenport was a man carved from granite, a self-made titan who built an empire on unwavering loyalty and ruthless intelligence. For years he had watched Chloe drift further into her shallow, materialistic world, hoping she would eventually find her moral compass. The discovery that she had silently sanctioned a plot to drain his legacy and destroy my life had broken his heart. But a broken heart did not make Winston weak. It made him entirely impenetrable. The private line on his mahogany desk began to ring. My father did not immediately reach for it. He stared at the flashing caller ID, his jaw set in a hard, uncompromising line. He pressed the speakerphone button, letting the call connect, filling the cavernous office with the sound of desperate, ragged breathing. Dad, Chloe sobbed, her voice echoing through the speaker, distorted by panic and sheer terror. Dad, you have to help me. Please, I am begging you. Winston leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished wood. He did not offer a word of comfort. What do you want, Chloe? Everything is gone, she wailed, her voice cracking as she hyperventilated. The feds froze all the accounts. They locked down the trust. I went to buy groceries this morning and every single one of my credit cards was declined. My platinum card, the black card, everything. Trent's lawyers will not even return my calls because their retainers bounced. I do not have a single dollar to my name. You have to wire me some cash. Just enough to get a hotel and hire defense counsel. Please, Dad. My father looked at me across the desk. His expression was completely devoid of the warmth he usually reserved for his family. It was the face of a CEO terminating a severe liability. You are asking me for a bailout, Winston stated, his deep voice carrying a terrifying calm. You are asking me to open my wallet for the woman who sat quietly at a dining table while her husband and his parasitic family plotted to steal $20 million from this company. You watched them frame your own sister. You watched them try to strip Nia of her dignity, her inheritance, and her future. And you did absolutely nothing, because you wanted to protect your country club membership and your imported sports cars. Dad, I did not know the full extent of it. Chloe cried out, her desperation turning into a frantic, pathetic defense. I swear I did not know Marcus had sterilized himself. I did not know they were going to leave Nia with nothing. Trent told me it was just a corporate restructuring. I was just trying to protect my marriage. You cannot leave me out here to starve. I am your daughter. You stopped being my daughter the moment you decided that my legacy was just a bank account for your fraudulent husband to loot. Winston replied, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. You traded your family loyalty for a seat at a table filled with thieves. I built this empire with my bare hands. I poured my blood and sweat into creating a future for you and your sister. and you were perfectly willing to let a pair of uneducated grifters tear it down. Dad, please, Chloe shrieked, the reality of his rejection finally piercing her thick shell of entitlement. The bank auditors are literally inside my house right now. They have court orders. They are tagging the furniture. They are taking the cars. They told me I have 1 hour to vacate the premises before they chain the doors. I have nowhere to go. My friends will not even answer the phone. You cannot let me become homeless. Winston did not flinch. His posture remained incredibly rigid. My legacy, my capital, and my protection are reserved exclusively for those who stand by this family. He said, his voice dropping to a final absolute register. You chose to stand with predators. Now you can learn how to survive among them. I have instructed the family attorneys to sever all financial ties with you. You are removed from the primary trust. You are removed from the corporate inheritance structure. You are officially on your own. No, Chloe screamed, a raw, animalistic sound of pure despair. You cannot do this. Nia, Nia, I know you are there. I know you are listening. Tell him to stop. My father looked at me and slowly pushed the phone across the desk. He leaned back in his chair, yielding the floor. It was my turn. I leaned forward, looking down at the speakerphone. I did not feel an ounce of the anxiety or the inadequacy that Chloe had forced upon me for my entire life. I was no longer the plain, boring sister she constantly belittled. I was the architect of her complete and utter destruction, and I had executed my design flawlessly. I am here, Chloe, I said, my voice smooth, cold, and perfectly controlled. Nia, please, she begged, her sobbing intensifying until she was practically choking on her own tears. You have to forgive me. I was stupid. I was blind. I was just so caught up in Trent's world. I am so sorry for how I treated you. I am so sorry I let Marcus talk down to you. We are sisters, Nia. We share the same blood. You know I always loved you. Please just talk to Dad. Just ask him to give me a small allowance. I will do whatever you want. I will go to rehab. I will live in a small apartment. Just do not let them throw me out on the street. I listened to her beg. I let the silence stretch out, allowing the weight of her pathetic, groveling pleas to hang heavily in the air. I thought about the countless times she had looked at me with undisguised contempt. I thought about how she had mocked my clothes, my career, and my supposed inability to keep a husband. I thought about how quickly she had sold me out to protect her fake, glittering reality. You do not love me, Chloe, I replied, stripping away her final desperate illusion. You love the safety net my name provides. You loved having a sister you could look down on to make your own shallow existence feel more significant. You loved the idea of being the successful daughter, while I played the role of the tragic, abandoned wife. Nia, that is not true, she cried out. It is the only truth that matters, I stated, my voice slicing through her protests. You watched Marcus systematically destroy my self-esteem. You knew I was crying myself to sleep over my inability to have a child, and you sat there in your custom silk dresses, drinking expensive wine, perfectly content to let me suffer. You did not just fail me as a sister, Chloe. You failed me as a human being. I am sorry, she wailed, the sound breaking into a hysterical, breathless wheeze. I have nothing left, Nia. They are literally carrying my dining room table out the front door. I have exactly $0. I do not even have gas in my car. What am I supposed to do? I leaned closer to the microphone. I thought about the first day of this entire nightmare, standing in her immaculate kitchen, listening to her tell me that I was a liability. I remembered the exact words she had used to try and make me feel small. You once told me that I always ruin everything, I said softly, my words falling like heavy stones into the quiet office. You told me I was too rigid, too boring, and incapable of navigating your sophisticated world. But look at where we are today. You entrusted your entire life to a group of sophisticated criminals, and they left you to drown. Meanwhile, I just tore down a massive international money laundering syndicate, recovered $20 million of stolen family capital, and rebuilt my entire life from the ground up. I took a slow, deep breath, savoring the absolute power of this final moment. Do not ever call this number again. I reached out and pressed the end call button. The line went dead with a sharp click. The heavy, peaceful silence flooded back into my father's office. Winston looked at me, a profound, undeniable pride shining in his eyes. He nodded once, a silent confirmation that the Davenport legacy was finally in the right hands. The narrative shifts, focus one last time, cutting instantly across the city to the Buckhead district. The sprawling multi-million-dollar mansion was entirely stripped bare. The sunlight poured through the large unadorned windows, illuminating a vast, echoing emptiness. The Persian rugs were gone. The crystal chandeliers had been carefully dismantled and boxed away. The custom Italian furniture had been hauled out by a team of relentless, unsmiling bank auditors. Chloe stood dead center in the massive hollow foyer. She was wearing yesterday's designer sweatpants, her hair a tangled, greasy mess. She held her dead phone in her hand, staring blankly at the dark screen. A man in a cheap gray suit walked past her carrying a clipboard. He did not look at her. He marched straight to the grand double front doors, pulling a heavy steel chain and a thick brass padlock from his bag. He wrapped the chain tightly around the custom iron handles. "Ma'am," the auditor said, coldly pointing toward the open archway leading to the driveway. "We are locking the premises. You need to step outside. Now." Chloe looked around the empty, echoing chamber. The walls, once covered in expensive modern art, were bare and marked with faded rectangular outlines. The life she had sold her soul to build was completely gone, wiped off the face of the earth, as if it had never existed at all. She dropped to her knees on the cold, bare marble floor. She threw her head back, her face contorted in a mask of absolute, unrecoverable agony. She opened her mouth, and a guttural, piercing scream of pure, helpless despair tore from her throat, echoing endlessly against the empty walls of her ruined kingdom. The absolute darkness of Chloe's shattered reality gave way to the brilliant, blinding sunlight of a crisp Tuesday morning. The air tasted clean, carrying the faint, sweet scent of blooming magnolias and damp earth. I stood shoulder to shoulder with my father on the perfectly manicured grass of Oakland Cemetery. Before us sat a massive, polished slab of black granite. The engraved gold lettering caught the morning light, spelling out the name Loretta Davenport, my grandmother, Big Mama. Winston stared at his mother's grave, his hands clasped firmly behind his back. The heavy, unyielding posture of the untouchable CEO was gone, replaced by the quiet reverence of a son, standing before the only person who had ever truly commanded his absolute respect. He spoke without looking at me, his deep voice rumbling against the quiet rustle of the weeping willow branches swaying above our heads. "She started with absolutely nothing," Winston said, his tone thick with memory. "She scrubbed floors in downtown office buildings just so I could have bus fare to get to college. She built the foundation of this entire family with her bare hands, piece by agonizing piece. She always told me that wealth is a tool, but integrity is the armor. I forgot that, Nia. I let the armor rust." I kept my gaze fixed on the gold lettering of the headstone. "You trusted your family," I replied softly. "You believed that the people sitting at your dinner table shared your values. That is not a weakness, Dad. That is just being a father." Winston shook his head, a harsh, self-deprecating sound escaping his throat. "A father's job is to see clearly," he countered, finally turning to look at me. I was completely blind to Chloe's vanity. I was willfully ignorant of Trent's reckless greed. I let them sit in my boardroom and siphon the blood from this family's legacy. But I was mostly blind to you, Nia. I looked right past the only person who actually inherited my mother's steel spine. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored charcoal suit and withdrew a thick, heavy leather portfolio. The Davenport Logistics crest was embossed on the front cover. He held it out to me, his hands perfectly steady, offering me a weight that could crush an ordinary person. "The federal auditors finished their preliminary sweep of the corporate accounts this morning," Winston stated, slipping back into his commanding executive register. "Thanks to your digital forensic work, every single dollar of the stolen $20 million has been successfully recovered and secured in a new, heavily encrypted federal trust." The board of directors held an emergency session at dawn. We voted unanimously to restructure the entire executive hierarchy. He pressed the heavy leather folder against my chest. I took it, feeling the smooth, expensive texture of the binding under my fingertips. "I am stepping down as the chief executive officer." Winston announced the words, carrying an immense historic gravity. I am transferring my voting shares, the primary control of the international shipping lines, and the absolute management of the family trust directly to you. You saved this empire, Nia. You bled the poison out of our ledgers. The CEO chair is yours. You have earned the crown. I looked down at the portfolio in my hands. Inside those leather covers lay the ultimate validation. It was the key to an international empire, the definitive proof that I had won, that I was the superior daughter, the undisputed victor. Society dictated that I should fall to my knees, accept the crown with tears of gratitude, and spend the rest of my life ruling my father's kingdom. I ran my thumb over the embossed crest. I thought about Marcus, who had spent 5 years trying to convince me I was broken and barren. I thought about Chloe, who had spent a lifetime trying to convince me I was boring and invisible. I closed the leather folder. With a calm, deliberate motion, I held it back out to my father. He stared at the portfolio, his thick eyebrows furrowing in profound confusion. He did not take it back. "Take it, Dad," I said, pushing the folder firmly against his hands until his fingers instinctively closed around the leather. "I am not taking your chair." Winston looked as if I had just spoken to him in a foreign language. "Nia, you do not understand the magnitude of this asset transfer." He began, his voice rising in disbelief. "I am giving you absolute control. You will never have to answer to a single shareholder." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, my voice remaining incredibly soft, but possessing an edge of pure diamond. "But I spent the last 5 years letting other people define my worth. I let Marcus define me as a failing wife. I let Chloe define me as a financial liability. I refuse to let you define me as the savior of Davenport Logistics. I am done operating inside other people's structures." I reached into my own pocket and pulled out a small matte black cardstock rectangle. I handed it to my father. He took it, his eyes dropping to the crisp, minimalist silver text printed across the center. "Loretta Financial Forensics and Risk Audit. Independent firm. Nia Williams, founder and principal director." Winston traced the name Loretta with his thumb, his breath hitching slightly as he recognized his mother's name. "I am not going to run your shipping empire," I explained, looking him directly in the eyes. "I am an auditor. I hunt predators. I find the rot hidden deep inside the ledgers and I burn it out. I have already leased a commercial office space downtown. I have hired a team of elite forensic accountants. I will accept a position on the Davenport board as a senior advisor. I will personally audit your accounts every single quarter to ensure no one ever attempts to siphon your legacy again. But I am not your employee, and I am not your successor. I am an independent contractor. I do not need your money, Dad. I do not need your empire to make me shine. I built my own." Winston stared at the matte black business card for a very long time. The tension in the cool morning air was thick enough to snap. He was a man who was used to absolute obedience, a patriarch who expected his commands to be treated as gospel. To be rejected by his own daughter, to have his monumental empire gently handed back to him, was a shock to his entire system. But as he looked up from the card and met my unwavering gaze, the shock melted away. It was replaced by a look of sheer, overwhelming awe. He did not argue. He did not try to negotiate. He let out a loud, booming laugh that startled a flock of birds from the nearby willow tree. He reached out and pulled me into a fierce, bone-crushing hug. "You terrifying, brilliant woman," Winston whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Big Mama would be so incredibly proud of you." I hugged him back, feeling the solid, grounding reality of a relationship that was finally built on mutual respect rather than obligation. "I know she would," I replied softly. I left the cemetery an hour later, leaving my father to enjoy a quiet moment with his mother. The city of Atlanta was wide awake as I walked through the bustling downtown financial district. The sidewalks were packed with corporate executives, bankers, and tourists rushing through the morning rush hour. I carried a fresh iced coffee in one hand, the cool condensation slipping against my skin. The air hummed with the aggressive, fast-paced energy of the city, but I moved through the crowd with absolute, untouchable tranquility. I stopped at the corner of a major intersection, waiting for the pedestrian crosswalk signal to change. Towering above the plaza was a massive, high-definition news jumbotron. It normally displayed stock market tickers and corporate advertisements. Today, the screen was dominated by a breaking news alert. The bold red banner across the bottom read, "Federal prosecutors deny bail in multi-million-dollar fraud syndicate." The camera footage cut to the exterior of the federal courthouse. Reporters and photographers swarmed the heavy stone steps, their camera flashes creating a blinding storm of light. Two armed federal marshals shoved their way through the aggressive press mob. Between them, linked by heavy steel chains around their wrists and waists, were Trent and Marcus. They had been stripped of their custom-tailored suits and their country club arrogance. They were both wearing bright neon orange federal jumpsuits. Trent looked completely ruined. His face was pale, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting wildly at the cameras in sheer unadulterated panic. Marcus looked even worse. He was weeping openly, dragging his feet as the marshals practically carried him up the courthouse steps. He looked straight into a news camera for a split second, and the absolute soul-crushing terror on his face was broadcast in brilliant high definition across the giant screen looming over the city. They were staring down the barrel of a 15-year mandatory minimum sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary. They were going to be locked in a cage, stripped of their names, their wealth, and their freedom for the rest of their natural lives. I stood on the busy street corner watching the men who had tried to destroy me being paraded like caged animals on national television. The pedestrian light turned green. The crowd surged forward around me, rushing toward their offices and their busy lives. I did not move. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my iced coffee, letting the rich, bitter flavor coat my tongue. I looked up at the giant screen one last time, watching the heavy courthouse doors slam shut behind Marcus and Trent. I smiled. A soft, genuine, perfectly peaceful smile. The absolute darkness holds for exactly 3 seconds. Then the heavy black screen slowly fades into a brilliant golden hour glow. The harsh, sterile lighting of the federal interrogation rooms and the cold, empty marble of Chloe's foreclosed mansion are entirely gone. Instead, the camera glides smoothly through a sprawling, impeccably designed penthouse suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrap around the entire living space, offering an unobstructed, breathtaking view of the Atlanta skyline as the sun begins to set, painting the city in vibrant shades of violet and burnt orange. The camera moves with deliberate predatory grace, panning across a pristine gallery wall, illuminated by warm, focused gallery lights. It is not a collection of abstract art or family portraits. It is a meticulously curated wall of framed newspaper front pages, financial magazine covers, and digital article printouts. The headlines are printed in bold, undeniable black ink. Federal authorities dismantle $20 million offshore syndicate. Davenport firm liquidated in historic SEC seizure. The brilliant black woman who brought down Atlanta's biggest financial fraud. The camera lingers on a high-resolution photograph printed on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. It shows Trent Davenport, his face pale and contorted in shock, attempting to hide behind his handcuffed wrists as federal marshals push him into a transport vehicle. Right below it is a smaller inset photo of Marcus weeping openly on the courthouse steps, his custom suit replaced by an oversized neon orange federal jumpsuit. The camera continues its slow, steady push, moving past the wall of conquests and settling onto a wide, luxurious leather armchair. I am sitting perfectly still, bathed in the soft, fading sunlight. My hair is flawlessly styled, my posture relaxed but completely commanding. I am wearing a stunning tailored silk suit in deep emerald green, a deliberate quiet mockery of the cheap, flashy gown Vonda had worn on the night of her destruction. I hold a crystal glass of expensive vintage red wine in my right hand. I slowly swirl the dark liquid, watching it cling to the sides of the glass like velvet. I lift my head. I look directly into the camera lens. The invisible barrier between the audience and my reality vanishes. I am no longer just living the story. I am dictating it. Marcus writes to me every single week. I say, my voice smooth, rich, and perfectly calm. The sound fills the penthouse, echoing with the absolute authority of a woman who has claimed complete ownership of her universe. He sends these pathetic, rambling letters from his 8x10 cell at the federal penitentiary. They are written on cheap, thin paper with a dull blue pen. He spends pages upon pages telling me how much he misses the smell of my perfume. He swears that he has found God. He begs for my forgiveness. He tells me that beneath all the lies, the theft, and the psychological torture, he actually still loves me. He says our 5 years of marriage were the only real thing in his life. I take a slow, deliberate sip of the wine, letting the complex, bitter notes linger on my tongue before swallowing. I do not read them anymore. I continue my gaze, never leaving the lens. I have my assistant feed them directly into the industrial shredder. I do not feel an ounce of pity. I do not feel a shred of lingering attachment. When a parasite is finally removed from your bloodstream, you do not mourn its absence. You simply marvel at how much easier it is to breathe. Marcus thought he could manipulate my biology. He thought he could weaponize my desire for a family and use my own body as a tool for his financial gain. He thought he was a mastermind. Now his entire existence is dictated by a prison warden, and his letters are turned into confetti. The camera pushes in a fraction closer. The ambient noise of the city traffic below is completely silenced, leaving only the sound of my voice. And then there is Vonda, I say, a cold, genuine smile touching the corners of my mouth. Vonda Williams believed that she was inherently superior to me. She believed that her proximity to stolen wealth made her royalty. She spent years looking down her nose at my career, my clothes, and my quiet, careful planning. When the federal government seized the Buckhead mansion, they did not just take the house. They took the designer bags, the luxury cars, and the stolen family heirlooms she had pawned to fund her pathetic fantasy. They left her standing on the sidewalk with absolutely nothing but the clothes on her back. I paused, letting the image of Vonda's total ruin hang in the air. She could not secure a loan. She could not access a single bank account. Her precious social circle completely abandoned her the moment her name was associated with a federal indictment. She had to find employment, which is a very difficult task for a woman who has spent her entire life living off the labor of others. I lean back into the leather chair, resting the wine glass on my knee. Currently, Vonda works the graveyard shift for a commercial cleaning service. She wears a polyester uniform. She pushes a heavy yellow mop bucket down long fluorescent-lit corridors. And the absolute most beautiful piece of poetic justice in this entire universe is the location of her assignment. She was assigned to clean the Davenport Logistics corporate headquarters. Every single night, Vonda Williams gets down on her hands and knees and scrubs the marble floors of the exact same building where I now sit as the senior risk advisor on the board of directors. She empties the trash cans outside my independent auditing firm. She wipes the dirt off the thresholds of the empire I successfully defended. I walk over floors that she has polished. It is a stunning display of cosmic symmetry. The camera angle shifts slightly, catching the golden light reflecting off the wine glass. Then, of course, we have Trent Davenport, I murmur, my tone dropping to a sharp, icy whisper. Trent was a man who believed that his complexion, his zip code, and his generational wealth provided him with an impenetrable shield against consequence. He genuinely believed that white-collar crime was just a sophisticated game, a minor infraction that could be smoothed over with a phone call to the mayor or a hefty donation to the district attorney's re-election campaign. He thought his privilege was absolute. I shake my head slowly, a look of profound clinical amusement crossing my face. White privilege is a powerful currency, I state clearly. But it has a strict exchange rate when it comes up against a $20 million federal deficit and irrefutable hard-coded digital evidence. Trent's golf buddies stopped returning his calls the morning his face was plastered across the financial networks. His elite legal team dropped him the second his retainer bounced. The judge at his sentencing hearing did not care about his country club championships. Trent was sentenced to exactly the same mandatory minimum as Marcus. He is currently locked in a federal facility, stripped of his title, his bespoke suits, and his arrogant illusion of invincibility. He is just a number in a database now. A cautionary tale whispered in corporate boardrooms. I set the wine glass down on the sleek glass table beside me. I fold my hands neatly in my lap, leaning slightly toward the camera lens. The golden sunlight begins to fade, casting deep dramatic shadows across the penthouse, but my face remains perfectly illuminated. Society loves to preach a very specific, very passive philosophy, especially to women who have been betrayed. I say, my voice growing fierce, precise, and utterly unapologetic. They tell you to take the high road. They tell you to heal quietly in the shadows. They hand you self-help books and tell you to let karma handle the people who destroyed your peace. They look you in the eye and repeat that tired, overused cliché. I tilt my head, mocking the sentiment. They say that living well is the best revenge. I hold the gaze of the camera. The silence stretches out tight and vibrating with absolute conviction. No, I state, the words striking like a hammer against anvil. That is a lie invented by cowards who are too afraid to balance their own ledgers. I stand up slowly from the leather chair. I walk toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the glittering electric expanse of the city. I am not a passive participant in my own life. I am an auditor. I locate the discrepancy. I identify the theft. And I execute the correction with extreme, uncompromising prejudice. I turn back to face the camera. The skyline of Atlanta glows behind me, a brilliant tapestry of light and power, but I command the frame completely. Living well is fantastic, I say, my voice dropping to a low, lethal purr. But it is not the best revenge. The best revenge is meticulously pulling the rug out from under the people who tried to bury you. The best revenge is taking back every single penny that rightfully belongs to you, stripping your enemies of their dignity, their freedom, and their false realities. The absolute best revenge is locking the doors, setting the trap, and watching the garbage get thrown exactly where it belongs, into a cold concrete federal cell. I smile, a brilliant, terrifying, and utterly satisfied expression. And then I whisper, the corners of my eyes crinkling with pure joy, "You live happily ever after." I raise my right hand and execute a slow, deliberate, perfectly timed wink directly into the camera lens. The screen instantly smashes to black.